hand for our previous speakers, namely my good friend Jerome, who just tore the roof off this place. Yeah. And I don't know if I want to get too heavy on the journalist, the journo class here, because I know that some of the speakers prior to me did. But one thing that I did think was funny in listening to Jerome's speech in particular is that the energy that he brought, and one of the points that he made specifically on how, white people don't really like to get... we're kind of hesitant to get angry about things. Well, I don't know if we can do that. I thought that was funny. And one of the reasons that the journalists came after us so heavily with this event is because we represent a class of people who are just willing to address the world honestly. We don't have to speak through a politician's filter, even through, one of these shitlib filters. We can just talk about things honestly, which is why I think I was introduced as a black person expert, just because I'm simply willing to acknowledge that groups behave differently. And one of my favorite things about black people is that they don't have to use this white person's filter of just we have to be fun. They can just be no, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and then those white liberals aren't going to say anything. So I do really like that, actually. I mean, imagine if we had a guy like that in Congress, sparring with AOC. That would be... How about that? How about that? But the reason that they have to call us white nationalists is, of course, because there's nothing worse that a person could be than a white nationalist. And if you look at the way the normal people, I think they're called normies, right? The way that they perceive everything basically is now filtered through the lens of how they view media. And we all know that the worst thing you can be, whether it's in the video games you play, the movies you watch, the worst thing you can be is a Nazi, is a white nationalist. And so, of course, if they can construct that through their control of media and propaganda, they can then pin that onto anybody, and it will make you toxic. It will make you unable to be associated with, which is unfortunately what's happened in this event. Some people pulled out. Not very cool, but nonetheless, the show will go on. So the proper way to address these criticisms, which are inevitable for reasons that we'll get into, is not to say, well, how can I be a white nationalist if I'm racially ambiguous? Or how can I be a white nationalist if I'm a campus conservative? It's to say, I'm a white nationalist. Well, you're gay. So it doesn't really even matter what you have to say to me. Now, there was a time in this country where a black guy could live next to a white guy, and, we'd make little jokes back and forth and everything, but that black guy and white guy would still attend the same barbecue and agree, hey, that guy was over here, we just moved in, I don't want him going around my boy, he had a little different, he would walk a little bit different, because, we agreed that there's just a certain line you don't want to cross, which is, of course, being gay. But we continue nonetheless.
That's right.
Because it is right. I mean, you have to remember, we are, we're bordering on a state, California, which as recently as 2008 struck down gay marriage when it was put on the ballot. The most liberal state that you could imagine even was too conservative for gay marriage as recently as 2008 within the Obama administration. Then we also have to remember that when Barack Obama ran in 2012, he had to run as an advocate of traditional marriage, whatever that means, because even that position was considered to be too radical for the party as recently as 10 years ago. And so now it's look at where we've gotten in the last 10 years. And this, of course, brings us to the slippery slope. The most vindicated thing in the history of rhetorical analogies, architecture, whichever one you like, the most vindicated. And what the slippery slope fallacy is basically a way for the intellectual class to attack normal people who have common sense, who can recognize things that are happening and predict from there that, okay, maybe this is what's going to happen next. And it's not perfect. It's not metadata. It's not peer-reviewed. But it's the best thing we have to predict future behavior. Of course, past behavior. So that's why they have to attack. That's a slippery slope fallacy. You know what's funny about the slippery slope fallacy being pointed out? If you actually study the list of logical fallacies, saying something is incorrect because it's a fallacy is in itself a fallacy. It's actually the fallacy. So checkmate, Hunter Avalon. You're not that smart. That's true. But this is, of course, what the journalists do. They have to smear, they can't be honest, and they literally exist as a class of professional liars. I mean, they think that they're breaking Watergate, which even that story, it's kind of based. We like Richard Nixon, And the funny thing about the Richard Nixon story is that that's really the first example that we can see in recent history of Republicans refusing to stand by Republicans, refusing to understand that we have friends, we have enemies, and throwing people under the bus. And that's just not conducive to a winning strategy. So we are here tonight, of course, to represent the American Populist Union, which we love. And you can see on their brochures and their artwork, they represent very simply three things, which are faith, family, and freedom. these are things that I think most of us could more or less agree with. How about faith, family, and freedom? Right? And it's like, we look at an organization like this, which is just getting off the ground, and we already, first of all, are able to pull an attendance like this with representatives like this who were going to be here before they decided not to be, but it's like we've only had a handful of events with the APU. We've got a great turnout, we've got great energy, and you almost have to wonder if that's why they're attacking us. Because every other conservative, nominally, organization that you'll see won't say they care about faith, family, and freedom. They'll say things like small government, low taxes, and it's like, what does that even mean? You know, you put that up to something like faith, family, and freedom, I think that the latter is going to win every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And the reason is because those are actual things. Small government is an abstraction, right? That is a means to an end. Even low taxes, that's a means to an end, which are supposed to be, by the way, preserving those things that we're actually here trying to preserve proactively, which are faith, family, and freedom. And the reason that we mention faith first is because this is what gets into the Constitution. I'm not talking about the piece of paper, I'm talking about the literal Constitution of the nation. That is a word that means something beyond just a piece of paper. It means what constitutes us. This room is constituted of American patriots, for example. So our Constitution, as we all know, was built and constructed for a moral and religious people. That is why we emphasize the faith aspect of it, because without the faith, the nation just simply can't exist. It's going to devolve to more or less where we are now, which is why at this event, we are so happy to see the strong emphasis being put on God, on the fact that whether or not people want to ignore it, Christ is King. He is the King of America, he is the King of the world. And until we recognize that, we can't expect to make progress, because if God isn't on our side, well then, who will be? So the next part of that is, of course, the family structure, the backbone of any society. It predates the society, along with faith, by the way. And it's like you look at what's under attack the most, it is the family structure. Whether it's second wave feminism, or actually I should say feminism in general. That was 2018 John Doyle. He was coming out for a second. He was like, only attack. That's the one that went too far. First wave feminism, we like that. You know, I was actually criticized in this, the lead up to this by the journalists for saying that women should be banned from voting. Which is not what I said. I would never say that. What I said correctly was that a lot of times it's sort of an edgy take for guys to say, nah, women shouldn't vote. But in actuality, the Founding Fathers intended for there to be prerequisites to everyone voting. There was no such thing as the right to vote. It was a privilege, it was a duty, and it was actually the sort of, I guess you'd say, syndication of this that's got us in such a mess in the first place. But of course the journalists had to take that and say, well, he doesn't think women should vote. And you know, I do have to make this point again. I don't know if you guys saw my my Putin video, my Russia-Ukraine video. How about that video? I have to double down on this. You know, they care so much about everybody voting in democracy, and it's like if you went back to the founding, and the Founding Fathers would have said something to the effect of like, yeah, women and probably feminine men shouldn't be allowed to vote because then their chaotic nature would manifest throughout society.
That's
and you would say, well, no, that's not right. That's mean. You're probably an incel. And then the Founding Father would just say, oh, well, do you have any evidence from your time that would contradict this? And you'd just be like, no, not exactly, not exactly. So it would seem that they were actually right. But every attack on the family, whether it's sexualizing children, whether it's perverting the family structure through, these new families that they're talking about, oh, you can have two mommies or two daddies, or you can actually just rent a mommy and then you can play like advanced house with another man, which we saw recently from certain people who are nominally conservative, but of course are just leftists, who figured out they could make a lot of money from the well-meaning nature of the right as something who wants to be like, oh, you think that we're bad? Well, look at this liberal. He thinks you guys have gone a little bit crazy. There's a huge market for that a lot of people have capitalized on. But anything from feminism to the sexual perversion, all of this is an attack on the family structure. And oftentimes we forget, too, that the way that they've eroded the middle-class economy, the way that they've eroded the housing market, those, too, are attacks on the family structure. You know, a lot of times younger guys on the right, I've noticed, they want to, go after things like premarital sex and things like that. And it's like, that's true. However, you have to understand, if you want people to get married, you're not going to do that by attacking sluts. You're really going to do that by attacking that which enables the slut, which is weak men and a collapsed economy that was conducive for people to settle down and get married young. We just don't have that anymore. Which is why, of course, the American Populist Union exists. We're trying to get that on the right track for the boys here so we can maybe get married young. We'll see. But the last thing of that is the freedom aspect. Typically what we see now when we talk about freedom is we see lifted trucks, we see machine guns, we see girls with American flag bikinis. That's all cool, I guess, but really what freedom was intended for, as the founders would have told you, was the freedom to pursue that which is good as defined by God. It was not freedom to pursue what I always call your preferred method of self-destruction. It was the freedom to do good. That was what the small government was about, getting the government out of the way so that you could do what was good as defined by God. Not getting government out of the way so you could start OnlyFans and you could try to get your local kids hooked on Adderall or things like that. It was to do good as outlined by God. And they wouldn't have even questioned whether or not that would have even been contested. Like if they were here now, the idea that people would be like, oh no, there is no good and evil, man. It's just like different points of view and Jesus was a hippie. They would have been like, okay, you're retarded. Step outside. I'm going to shoot you now. That's like literally what they would have said. Don't get mad at me. That's true. That's a quote. You can read the journals. They would have said that. In a much more sophisticated caliber of English, but that would be the sentiment nonetheless. And if you look at what the left is promoting actively, and I don't mean the left like the radical left, I'm often torn on whether or not that's a good sort of slogan for us to call the left radical, because on the one hand it's like the radical left sort of scares people, but on the other hand it's like that's not the radical left, that's just the left. They're not even that's just the way they are. Their mainstream positions, as we covered, even the last 10 years, have just gone so far left that we're now just begging them to slow down without any real consequences being manifested. So if you look at what they're promoting, it's the inverse of all of that. They don't promote faith, they promote the absence of that, which of course is just faith in the material, faith in whatever makes them feel good. If it feels good, do it. This is the governing philosophy of the left, and of course it is corrosive to the human soul, which is why they're able to get people so consolidated and so quickly able to mobilize for their causes, because they have created a population of people who are so depressed, in such despair, and they're convinced that it's normal people who are like that. There's a real conversation to be had about how dysgenic these people are. I mean, the boomer class will maybe say, they're all fat and ugly, and that's true. But why is that? It's because of hormones in the water, plastics in the food, the packaging for the food. And it's like this has bred a generation of people who are so dysgenic, so spiritually ill, and they are convinced that it's normal people who hold a mirror up to that and exist normally. I more or less just want to be left alone, just be normal. And they're just like, no, you can't. You have to buy into this, otherwise I'm going to be a victim forever. So that's why that exists. So it's not enough to say, we just have to own the libs and have libs of TikTok accounts, which is so important, but it's like we have to have a conversation as to why that is, which is why oftentimes conservatives will, perhaps naively say, oh, well, culture is downstream, or politics is downstream from culture. We have to fight the culture before the political battles. And it's like, well, it's not that simple. I mean, if you think about what a culture is and what that takes to make, that's decades of proactive work, right? We don't have that. I mean, we're probably 1 or 2 elections away from a permanent governing majority being occupied, of course, by the global libtard menace. At that point, I don't know what we're going to do. So we really do only have a finite amount of time left, which is why I've advocated for the political battles. The only institution that we have left that we could occupy would, of course, be politics. We don't have enough time to take over Hollywood or academia. We could build our parallel institutions, but then that's just an echo chamber. All we really have time left to do is to occupy government and to use that for good and against evil. And I think we have a pretty good idea of who's good, more or less, and we probably have a pretty good understanding of who's evil. I mean, these people, have you seen this recently, openly advocating for Disney sexualizing children? I mean, these people had a fit. Think about what that means. When these people are complaining because there was a bill passed that simply said, we probably shouldn't be talking to children about anal sex and genital mutilation, and they claim that this was oppressive and an attack on their culture, we should really think about what they mean by that. Maybe these people aren't just your well-meaning neighbor who disagrees a little bit. Maybe they're actually worshiping Moloch. More or less, I think that's probably true. But anyways, that's the reason we get attacked by the journalists, because we are the only people on the right, people who are saying we will put America first, we will put American families first, and more importantly, we are the only people who will tell the left, stop. Not slow down, not do it this way, not we're actually the ones who want to do it, just stop. Cut it out, it's not cool, it's actually pretty cringe. And we're the only people doing that, which is why even at an event that only has 100 people, 50 people here, we get attacks coordinated by Rolling Stone, Business Insider, Washington Post, MSNBC. They don't do that, by the way, for CPAC, which is an organization that gets millions of dollars funneled into it. A-list GOP politicians, strategists, commentators, they all attend that, and there's not a single article accusing it of white nationalism, accusing it of anything untoward, and you have to ask yourself why that is. Because nobody's perfect. We know this as Christians. We're all sinners. So if everyone's sinning, you have to wonder why not only are they only focusing on us, but they're like inventing the wrongdoing too. They're lying about it. So you have to wonder why that is. And of course we know it's because they are servants of the establishment, and we in this room are the only legitimate political threat to that establishment, which is why they attack, because they know that, and we know that too. So that's kind of something to be excited about. It's true. It's so true. But we're only going to be the threat because we're going to do what it takes to win. And a lot of times I think people on the right get uncomfortable with winning. You know, everybody in this room would acknowledge that we've done nothing but lose ground in the last 100 years. And everyone would say, well, I want to win. But because all we know is losing, we tend to be uncomfortable with that which will actually help us win because we're just not familiar with it. And a lot of times we'll jump immediately to Fed posting. You know, we'll talk about, we got to take the country back. And it's like, you want to go door knocking? I'd rather just, and then they Fed post. And it's because in order for a political solution to be attractive, it has to be that. It has to be attractive. And there's something very attractive about this sort of fantasy about you and your buddies clearing suburbs of the ATF, but you and your buddies dressing up in raincoats and door knocking in that same suburb. That's less attractive. But of course, that's actually what it's going to take to win, like he correctly pointed out earlier in this evening. And so I would say that it's not so much that we have to wield power, but we have to just attack in general, because of course as conservatives we're sort of always on the back foot. But there is something to be said about attacking the journalists, attacking the media, who, by the way, when they write articles like about that TikTok account and they're doxing them, they're not doing that because everyone's like, I really would feel as though this piece were more thorough if there were an address included. It's because they want to get them killed. That's what it is. They want these people who they know are dysgenic, who they know are miserable, these Antifa types, to just go to that person's house and kill them. It's happened before. We saw this in Portland. We've seen this many times, and nothing is done about it. So that's what they're trying to incite. So at this point, it's not even that we're attacking journalists or we're attacking media. At that point, it's just self-defense. Because if they had it their way, they would all have people like Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Fallon making pre-written little note card quips about us as we all get loaded into mass graves. Like, that is literally what would happen. It would be on the late night talk shows, and there'd be some little quip like, conservatives, they talk about physical fitness and eating raw eggs, yet they're fat when we threw them into the mass grave. And then the audience would be like, oh, that's so funny. It's not funny. I don't like you. Anyway, we continue. So, at this point, it really is just self-defense, which as conservatives, we stress so severely. But it's like, even with the First Amendment, right? We talk about this a lot. We allowed for these journalists and these media figures to incite riots that did billions of dollars worth of property damage to our country just 2 summers ago. We're supposed to forget this. We allow them to incite anti-white rhetoric that leads to families in Wisconsin being mowed down by a guy in a van, a black nationalist, during a Christmas celebration. You guys remember this? This was in December. This was 4 months ago. It has been memory hold. Perhaps more recently, the subway shooter who is espousing black nationalist rhetoric on social media. He goes and he shoots up a subway, and it gets memory hold. Because at first they're like, oh, epic, just in time for midterms, we have a gun scandal. But then, of course, it's disadvantageous to their politics. It gets swept under the rug. So every time something like that happens, that is literally because the media incites that type of stuff against people like us. And so there's actually a serious argument to be made that that is a violation of the First Amendment. And if we had a governing class who were willing to actually wield power for good against evil, they would go after that. If we had a competent right-wing government, they would expand the libel laws, expand the defamation laws, and journalists would think twice before printing things about people being white nationalists or being racist, or even things like that, which they know are lies, trying to incite chaos, because people would go after them, and people would put them in jail. I can't help but smile. I didn't want to do that, by the way. I really just wanted to make my little YouTube videos, and then they kind of pushed me in the corner, and I'm like, you know what? If you got thrown in jail, I wouldn't lose sleep over it. I really wouldn't. So, but that is why they attack us, of course, because we, like we said, are the only people who actually have the capability of doing that. It's not the CPAC class, it's not the Matt Schlapps, who, by the way, have to manufacture their own. Someone gets paid to go to D.C. and to make little compilations, get schlapped. Have you seen those? The Matt Schlapp owning compilations, because he sees the Ben Shapiro compilations, he wants to be a part of it. We don't have to do that. We have our own armies on standby of 15-year-old autistic kids to make our compilations for us, right? That's very special. I've said that before. I would like to say that I made having autism cool, which is kind of funny because I don't even have autism. Elijah Schaefer just got mad because I was smarter than him, and he's like, "You must be autistic," and I was kind of like, well, "Sure." But you'll notice something about people who tend to be younger and involved in right-wing politics. They keep calling us autistic. And so I've said that you almost do have to be autistic in a way to be successful in right-wing politics. And what I mean by that is something that I think we all know is true, which is that think about the battle that we have up ahead. It's not like we're repeating the same basic talking points and getting a $10,000 check from a donor for basically propagating that which has been so destructive. There's no treasure for this, or for us in this. There's no thing at the bottom of the barrel. There's no point that we're going to get to cash out. Anybody who's made a lot of money actually challenging the system hasn't actually challenged the system. They'll get to a certain point and then they'll stop, and then people will say, "Oh, this guy's actually good. You know, he says that socialism sucks, and AOC is a socialist, so he's actually challenging the system. And he lives in a 7-figure mansion and a gated community that exists to basically escape the consequences of the talking points that he's espousing." So that's the point. It's like, if you're a person who does not view this life as anything other than the material, as the checklist, simply what can I do? Can I buy these things, do these things, or whatever? If you don't view this as anything more than this life, why would you ever want to challenge this system? You could make a lot of money going along with the system, or a lot of money getting up to a certain point and selling hope to people who know that this country has sold them out. So it's like, why would you? You have to be fixated. You have to have your heart in the right place. And to a class of people who has been so eroded from anything that transcends this physical life, they literally could only view that fixation and not understand it in terms of the spiritual, in terms of good and evil, but only in terms of the medical. Like, oh, you want to save your country and you're willing to die doing it? You must have autism. Yeah, maybe I do, okay? That's epic. I like that he said that's right. Hey, I appreciate it. So, with that, I'll say thank you all for coming out. Thank you for listening to my speech, to the wonderful speeches that we had tonight. And you can't allow them, last thing I'll say, to get you black-pilled. You know, I had a very interesting conversation with a gentleman in the bathroom earlier. I was straightening my tie. This big guy comes in, he's just like looking at me, and I'm like, this is it. I'm dying in the bathroom. It's over. But he was talking about the white pills and the black pills. And, you know, there is something strategically to be said about the tactical dissemination of the black pills, because we don't want to get too comfortable. We have to understand that this is a very real fight, and we could very well lose our country. Honestly, we might. But at the same time, we have to remember, we have all the right people on our side. We know who are our friends, and we know who are our enemies, and it's never been easier to tell the difference. These people are openly advocating for the genocide of the unborn, the sexualization of children, the destruction of everything that is natural and good, and then you have us. People who are normal, people who just want to get a house, have families, maybe play a little Call of Duty, maybe drink some White Monster, because that's our culture, right? But other than that, we're just normal people, and that's why they hate us. And they attack us because we're normal people who give enough of to actually do something to challenge that power structure that has destroyed our country. So thank you guys again.
No, thank you, John.
Well, hey, thank you for making it. It's funny, it's like, who gets the last clap? But it's just me and this guy who just going back and forth with the thank yous. Make everyone uncomfortable. Run the clock. But anyways, thank you all for coming out. We will drain the swamp. We will restore order to this country. We will make it great again. We will make it Christian again. We will make it moral again. And most importantly, we will make America based again. We will make it great again, greater than ever before. And if we don't, I'm not like married to this idea of America. I mean, I love America, don't get me wrong. This is my home. But people often forget, empires rise and fall. We are in a cycle right now which many empires have gone through throughout history, and they've never been able to reverse it. So what I always say is,